His major assumption was that if you are nonviolent, if you suffer, your opponent will see your suffering and will be moved to change his heart. That's very good. He only made one fallacious assumption. In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none.
And Du Bois was able to articulate, just even through his own experiences of having to navigate racism and racial perceptions of himself, what that process does to your psyche for Black Americans when the white world sees you one way and you see yourself as another way, and you're forced to have to negotiate and navigate that process. And he very eloquently also talked about the psychological, mental, emotional toll that also does when the reflection you have of yourself is not reflected back to you.
So for me, the American flag, I feel like it represents an idea of what we want America to be. This idea of like justice for all, you know, but that's not our reality from many standpoints.
When I see the American flag, I can see basically kind of like the false supremacies. They give us like the American dream. Like, hey, if you work hard and do your best, you're gonna have a beautiful wife, you know, money, cars, all of that. But we never talk about what's underneath that. Like, you have to look a certain way or act a certain way. So basically, that's a long-winded way of saying that when I see the American flag, I see pretty much pretentiousness and also the horrors of standing up against that.
With my background, having a lot of family in the military still, I have a family that was recently in Afghanistan and whatnot. It means a lot that people fought for it. It also means a lot because I am a first gen living here. My mom is from another country. It means a lot to be a part of the American flag.
The American flag has a double meaning to me because I took ROTC in high school and I knew the actual, I guess, breakdown of the colors. Red stands for hardiness, valor. White, hope, innocence, and purity. Can't remember all of it, but now it has a totally different meaning. It's a symbol of oppression for some, while it may be a symbol of freedom for others. I think specifically marginalized groups of people who actually embody what I guess America pretends to be. Those things get ignored, and it's just a symbol of oppression and growth that needs to happen, that hasn't happened yet.
Well, I'm kind of indifferent about the American flag. It doesn't necessarily have like a specific meaning to me. I know it's supposed to stand for freedom, liberty, as such, but I don't feel like it fully represents that because of like what's going on in the world as of today. So I'm slightly indifferent about how the American flag resonates with me.
I've actually come into some pretty new knowledge that its actual meaning, what it means to me. I mean, it doesn't hold a very significant meaning to me, honestly. It's just a flag. It's just a flag to me with stripes and stars. They're not very significant of any liberties, freedom, or anything of that nature. That's just the connotation placed on said symbol of the flag. So, yeah. doesn't really hold very much meaning to me.
I think the American flag symbolizes a sense of elusive freedom. It symbolizes a country that everybody can come to and, you know, make this great life, but that's not the truth. I mean, the American dream is a lie for most. So it's elusive. It's something that everybody wants and thinks they can achieve, but in actuality, in practice, that's not true.
I think now, sometimes I really don't feel like an American, if that makes sense. I feel like with traveling abroad, people view us as Americans, but in my own country, I'm African American. And so that makes me feel like the American flag doesn't represent much for me. I think it's supposed to represent freedom. I think it's supposed to represent unity. But I think that's for certain demographics. And yeah, it doesn't really mean much to me. It's a reminder that I'm in this country, and yeah, that's about all I can say for that.
Now, there are 20 million people in this country. And you can't put them all in jail. I know how my nephew feels. I know how I feel. I know how the cats in the barbershop feel. A boy last week, who was 16 in San Francisco, told me on television, thank God we got him to talk. Maybe somebody will start to listen. He said, I got no country, I've got no flag. Now, he's only 16 years old. And I couldn't say you do. I don't have any evidence to prove that he does.
Well, I think within the context of thinking through code switching and the history of kind of race and racism in the United States, you can think it through particularly how African Americans navigate different spaces depending upon the context that they're in, but particularly when they need to navigate predominantly white institutions like a university, the kind of larger history of race and racism, how that impacts their experiences and creates a context where they can feel that they have to interact in particular spaces to meet particular assumptions, or actually to make sure they are not fulfilling any particular stereotypes that whites or white institutional spaces kind of create to have folks kind of shape and think about their experiences.
Do you feel like you have to change identities in certain environments on campus?
Definitely. Yeah, it depends on who you're talking to, you know. Code switching is definitely a thing for multiple reasons, but it's more so like you kind of feel the need to relate to people. And so like if you're talking to someone like a white person, you start talking, you know, like, what's up, man? They're gonna be like, excuse me, like, come again? You know, and so it's a lot easier to try and meet people where they are.
Basically, they associate, you know, speaking proper with intelligence, which is just the way you say things. In other words, some people, they feel better like about how you say things. It's more about how you say it than what you're actually saying.
Most certainly, especially when it comes to work. I work at the pod markets on campus, the different little convenience stores and different pods. And they expect you to hold a certain level. It's considered professionalism when the identity switch does happen. It's considered just being the tone of voice or the the mannerisms and the position, the way that you carry yourself in the store versus how would my position, my posture, my demeanor would be in my room hanging out with some friends. They're two very different identities.
I used to when I first got here. Well, I didn't have to change much because of my accent. Some people can tell where I was from or my mannerisms. But I do know in professional environments I have to. But now I don't feel like I have to do it as much because I'm more comfortable with myself. But being here at a PWI, yeah, you do have to code switch just to get through basic shit.
For me personally, I talk very proper, people like to say. There's not that huge of a difference. I do not. I use a lot more cognates and not as many contractions when I'm talking to certain people, but there's not like a specific area where I'll just like tighten up. Of course, when I'm talking to professors, I'll treat them with the respect that is due, but I try to talk to everybody the same.
Definitely. Being a student leader, being Black, I definitely have to switch between melody and melody. Like, I have to be this proper girl who's like really educated and definitive all the time, in educational settings, in leadership settings, in any setting really when I'm surrounded by white people. If the majority of the people in the room aren't Black, I have to be somebody else. I have to be the better version of myself at all times.
I definitely feel like when I was a RA, I was a resident assistant for a few years. I feel like sometimes I had to switch up my personality, especially with like staff meetings. Sometimes I felt like I had to step back because sometimes I can come off with a really strong personality. I'm very outspoken, and some people are intimidated by that, especially from Black women. So a lot of times I felt myself like having to say less and just listen versus say what I actually want to say, which some people who are very passive may view it as aggressive. But me, I just think I'm a naturally assertive person. I think I'm naturally bold. And when I'm around my Black counterparts, I never feel like I have to change up or silence myself at all.
How do you balance the two identities that you have? When I say identities, I'm referring to your quote-unquote Black side and the side of you that is more accepted by the white majority.
This is actually an interesting topic. I remember my freshman year being here at UC. As you can tell, I don't really speak like most Memphis people do. I'm from Memphis, but I don't speak like I am. And so I remember when I first got here, it was hard for me because I felt like I wasn't accepted by either culture, so to say. And so the advice that my mentor gave me at the time, she went to Howard and she was like, Tiffany, just be you. And so I try and stick to that no matter who I'm speaking to. I try and stick to being true to myself.
Basically, how I manage my two identities. So it's just like, it just depends on the environment, honestly. Like, for example, if I'm going to like the workhouse or whatever, to the office, and I am playing my music very loud, and it may not say like the most appealing words or whatever, and it just happen to be like my coworkers outside, I definitely will turn it down. And like, even if I'm like dancing in the car or something like that, I'll just stop all of a sudden and just, try to like, I guess, I don't want to say normal, because like, what is it? But I just want them to not perceive me in a certain like perspective, like a negative perspective, of course. In regards to my just regular everyday life, I try to like continue to just be me, like who I am, not censoring anything, and just continue to go through that life. But like, as far as on the professional side, definitely I will say I like censor. I don't bring all of me to work, so to say. I only bring part of me. Like, I don't go to the point where I'm just like completely somebody else, but I'm not completely just me as well.
Well, all in all, like, the way I say things might change, but I still keep that same amount of truth in it, at least. Like, you're not gonna change my opinion regardless of who you is. So, I mean, I can't, it's a conscious thing. Like, when I switch up the voices, like, kind of like subconscious, but it's like, when I notice I do that, it's like, why am I, it's like a turmoil. It's like, why am I doing this? Because such and such. Like, you shouldn't have to do this. You your own man. So like, it's like a turmoil that I kind of deal with. All in all, I'm just gonna say how I say it, and if it comes off however I say it, it's what I said.
I balance it by, well, understanding that I don't have to prove myself to anyone as far as what my identity is, because it's not just being Black. There are a plethora of things. However, Black is the first thing that most people see other than me being a woman. And so I balance that by knowing I don't have to prove my identity to anyone, but that happens from me just being self-aware and having knowledge of myself. No one can't tell me who I am because they don't know the layers that make me me. You don't know about my hometown. You don't know about my ancestry. You may know about my ancestry by looking at me slightly, but you don't know everything that comes into making me me. So I balance it by knowing, like, you can't tell me who I am because I know that. And so, yeah.
Well, I balance them. I think it's purely circumstantial. It's just when you're in the environment to display a certain identity, then that identity just comes forth. Maybe not in full earnest every time, even if it's just like a word switch. So it's, my greeting would be to one peer, maybe, hey, how you doing? And then the salutations be, well, you have a great day, versus to another, it'll be, man, what's good? How you been? How you feeling? And then a salutation for that individual being, well, all right, I'll catch you later. You know, it's two different greetings, two different salutations. But I mean, the balance itself, I think the balance, the restricting factors are the environment, the particular person that I may be talking to, and then mood. Mood definitely has a place as far as in balancing the different identities laying within me.
Balancing my two identities, it's really a struggle, because sometimes I get tired of being someone else, of putting on somewhat of a facade, even though it is me. I get tired of being that person. I get tired of always being proper and definitive. I get tired of trying to know more than everybody else in the room, because I feel like I represent my entire race. It's not hard to balance them per se, because I only do one. I do them in different settings. So educational settings, whenever I'm in the classroom, whenever I'm in a meeting, whenever I'm on the phone with someone who's educational or a business prospect, I am Melody. But whenever I'm at home, I'm with my friends. Whenever I'm just in a very comfortable environment that's surrounded by my people, or people who just don't particularly judge me in a way, I can let my shoulders down and be myself.
I would say I like to be emotionally intelligent, so I like to view who my audience is, who my crowd is, and if I know someone is going to be offended by, I guess, natural me, depending on what kind of day it is, I may try to lean more on the passive side. But honestly, that's not fair. Like, I shouldn't have to do that. I should be able to be myself without somebody calling me a mad Black woman when I get passionate about an issue that's not just. And I think that people confuse like boldness with aggression, because that's not who they are, and that's not the image that was painted out for them. And when you have power to decide how people are supposed to act versus how they're not supposed to act, you can say that passivity for women is what it should be. You have the power to make that distinction. And so anything that's not, I guess, a passive woman is incorrect or should not be. And I can even remember growing up and people telling me, like, oh, you're mean, or you're too outspoken. They don't want to hear that. I mean, and that's really a bunch of crap, because this is who I am, and God gave me the voice that He gave me, and it's supposed to be used. It shouldn't be silenced. So it's just a big power play, and I think a lot of our leaders in this country want to silence people who will speak up, and people who aren't afraid to speak up for justice, and people who aren't afraid to be themselves. Like, they want to silence those people, because people like Martin Luther King, he didn't silence himself. He had a powerful voice, and look at the change he made. And so I think that's what people are afraid of, people who want to speak up.
When I code switch, I guess I've gotten accustomed to it. I don't feel a specific way about it. It just kind of happens. It's just like routine. Not like I just think about like, oh dang, I gotta tie my hair up, or I gotta put on these business clothes or whatever. It's just like, this is like necessary, you know, in order to keep my job, or like just keep that perspective of like, oh, I'm professional. I'm like, yeah, I'm professional, and I'm just trying to keep it like basically the correct etiquette and things like that.
The feelings that I have about it, I mean, I guess I'm kind of indifferent. I have very nonchalant demeanor towards the actual act of having to switch identities. It's just, I understand in society that certain aspects of a person are deemed more acceptable than others, and so I don't display the ones that I feel may be questionable, like that I have any doubts about. So like certain terms, not even gonna put, I mean, you can use something like a politically incorrect term like fag or something like that, that's not acceptable in certain, whether it be workspaces or just different environments in general. And so, like I said, it's purely off the situation. But I mean, unless the person that I'm talking to specifically makes me feel a certain way about the way that I'm talking to them, then I myself don't have a personal feeling towards the actual act of code switching. I just participate in it when it's necessary, or if I feel like participating in it, because sometimes I won't switch identities at all. So
it gets annoying sometimes. Like I mentioned previously, I don't feel like I have to do it as often because my voice already sounds a certain way to some people. But at the same time, it is kind of like I can do that. Like I have a couple different ways of speaking, and the fact that I can change that at will. And sometimes it does happen unconsciously, but the fact that I know that I can, sometimes it is nice, but I jokingly said it earlier, sometimes it does feel like a survival tactic from just being a chameleon and having to change it so much. So inconveniencing or annoying on one end, but also kind of empowering on the other. Just depends on the day and the context.
When I have to code switch, it honestly makes me furious. Because, I mean, for lack of better terms, there are a lot of white people who don't have to code switch. They can be themselves wherever they are, whatever environment they're in. They don't change because they're around Black people or Asians or Latinos. Like, they can be the same, and it doesn't matter what other people think because they're in the majority. They're privileged in that area. So when I have to do it, it's almost like I have to think about myself, and I have to think about you and how you're gonna feel, and alter my life to fit your comfort or to make you comfortable and I'm uncomfortable, which is okay. Like, I feel like it takes a lot for a person to be able to do that, and it definitely teaches you a lot about how to work with people and how to be less of yourself. It's a very selfless thing to do, but it gets annoying when you have to do it in your workplace. You have to do it in your classes. You have to do it in your study groups. You have to do it at your internship. It's like, when do I get a chance to just be fully me and not have to worry about who I'm making uncomfortable or offending?
Yeah, so I feel like it really makes me sad at the end of the day, thinking that I have to kind of change, not necessarily who I am, but how I portray things to other people. On a more personal note,
I think about the concept of rejection and how you're faced with that if you don't choose to code switch. Like if you don't, meet the person where they're at, then it's easy for them to try and place certain labels on you,
That's a really interesting question because it's never really invoked any emotions before. It's so natural that I've never felt anything about having to do it. But I guess I do get tired. It's sometimes I just really am tired of being happy or smiling because I don't want anyone to think that I'm an angry Black woman, or even kind of saying anything that I have to say in a polite manner because I don't want anyone to feel like I'm being aggressive towards them. But I guess just tiring. Sometimes I would just want to be myself or be passionate without being perceived as heightened.
Can you remember a time when you had to code switch? An example could be in the classroom, on a job, at an internship, anything of that nature.
I'll just say I code switch every day. It's not something that happens ever so often. It happens every day. This is a majority white world, and I'm a Black woman. I really, I do it every day. Let's see, the last time I code switched, let's say yesterday in class, we have presentations where we talk about issues dealing with race and ethnicity, justice, and we were talking about Robert E. Lee and the statue that got resurrected in Alabama by the daughters of the Confederate in 2000. And just kind of nobody else in my classroom knowing who the daughters of the Confederacy were and explaining to everybody what they've done and kind of having to go the extra mile to get people to see why, it's still so hard for Black people to exist in this country. They were comparing Confederate monuments to Germany and how in Germany you can't do these things anymore, but also how Germany has a museum and they kind of not celebrate their history but understand it, and then saying, well, aren't these monuments kind of like museums just in public where we understand our history? And I was like, absolutely not, because of the fact that these people are erecting these statues to purposely do something, and that something is not to educate or remind you of what we shouldn't do again, is what could happen. So just always having to be the one who steps up and tells everybody what's what.
There'll be times when I'm sitting with friends in class or whatever, and we're talking, and then my professor asks a question or they want us to get engaged, and so that's when it's code switch, just like that. Or in my race and ethnic studies class, it's really funny because all of us Black people, we're what's up, we're talking about the topics and how it affects our lives, and then our professor asks us a question and we're switch, into that mode. During my freshman year in my English class, I was the only African American in my English class, including the professor. So basically, anytime I kind of elevated my voice in any type of way, she felt that I was kind of intimidating, or I was yelling at her, or came off aggressively. So I basically had to tone that down, and at that point I didn't feel very confident in her room anymore, to speak up and really fully show that my knowledge of the material anymore, because I felt like I was kind of being attacked, or whereas she felt like I was attacking her, I just didn't want to come off a certain way. So I feel like just me being quiet and not speaking up was probably the best choice. And on top of that, my grade was at risk. It's I just wanted to pass this class with, my desired grade of an A, and I don't want any conflicts or any oppression for that reason.
Definitely at my job right now, it's pretty much customer service, and one aspect of it is phones. And you know, like, I'm just a work study, so I don't have like all the questions. So there's that pressure. And then like the people calling, they're expecting a counselor who knows all the answers and to make all their dreams come true. But they get me, so I have to help them out with that. And first, you know, like I have to say a little spiel, and that's like the first impression. And if I, you know, sound like regular, well, I don't want to say regular, but just like casual, like, hey, what's up? What you want? They're gonna be like, is this the right place? You know, like some stuff like that. You know, like they start to get nervous. So like, you know, throw on the white voice to make them comfortable, you know, make sure everything's all right, make them feel that, like I know what I'm saying. Which, of course, you know, I have, you know, some experience being there for a while, but I still don't have all of the answers. But with that tone, I can assure them that I might not know the answers, but we're gonna figure it out and everything is gonna be okay.
Yeah, it isn't as noticeable for me because, like I said, I come from a predominantly black city. I'm from Memphis. And so even then some people can tell, I guess, that my voice was changing, or as I call it, my customer service voice. But when I'm here, sometimes I do feel like I have to code switch in the classroom, because if I do speak even relaxed, it's misinterpreted as anger or you're too emotional about the material. And so sometimes if I do speak clearly and concisely, this is why I disagree with your point, blah, 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 then my point gets across because, I'm not gonna be constantly cut off or interrupted, which is then at that point, it's like I'm now trying to prove to you. It's like when people like go and say, why are you mad, blah, 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 I'm not touching you, and they do it, and it's like, yo, I'm just trying to get my point across here, and I'm sorry if you're too sensitive or butthurt to get over it. Like, obviously, you have a right to be mad about the material, you have a right to be passionate, but that doesn't mean your thoughts should be, invalidated.
A very specific example of code switching, because that I can think of, the first one that comes to mind. A little background context before I go into it, though. I'm a very comfortable person. I love being comfortable, so that's in my clothing, that's in my hairstyle, that's in the way that I talk. I just love to be comfortable. And so for the most part, you'll catch me in sweatpants or a hoodie and whatnot. So when I take a class like business communications, where we have speeches and whatnot, you have to dress up, whether that be business formal or business casual, or just a more professional casual look in general, where it's not as comfortable. That would be the first thing that comes to mind. So anytime I've taken any form of oratory class, or even, I would say maybe even a lab setting where you're required to wear a specific type of shoe versus in a slide or something like that. So that's an example of code switching when it comes to my clothing, me having to be more formal or more business casual than I would prefer to be normally. Any other settings? Maybe. Yeah, no, for sure, job interviews. Anytime that you're looking to get a new job, you want to make that best impression and align the impression that you give with the traits and the values, I want to say, aspired, or they're demanded, so to speak, by the company that you may be interviewing for. And those are for sure instances where you're required to, quote unquote, code switch.
Definitely, actually. Today, I was walking past an older Caucasian gentleman, and he gave me kind of a look, and instead of kind of initiating that stereotype of I'm gonna be loud and obnoxious, I greeted him. I said, how are you doing today, sir? And as he left, I said, you have a lovely day. And it kind of changed his face and his thought process of me. Definitely, when speaking to authority, you definitely need to be mindful that the current situation in America is not the safest for people that look like us. And it's definitely important to always be mindful of everything going on around you.
Yes, I've had to code switch a lot at work, specifically the job I was working at last year. I was working at a Catholic school for an after-school program here in Knoxville, and a lot of my students were white, and I definitely had to code switch around them, just because, I mean, they're young, so they don't necessarily understand a lot about Black culture, and which is, I mean, understandable, they're kids, but to avoid like confusion and like, again, making people uncomfortable or just something that they're not used to, I definitely had to kind of code switch. I mean, I had to turn on the white voice or turn off a little bit of slang and be a little less bold. So it was kind of like a watered down Coke. You know, it's still the product, but it's less fizzle. I hope that makes sense.
Do you believe that there are two Americas? When I say two Americas, I'm referring to there being a white America and a Black America. And if you do believe that, would you mind elaborating?
Well, yeah, I do believe there are two Americas because it's like two different worlds. Because, of course, you know, everyone deals with classism, which, you know, the world runs around money. So if you don't have any, we don't like you. You know, you're just gonna be arms to make more money for someone else who has money. That goes for everybody. But for whatever reason, looking like this, like having this skin color and having this type of hair, well, historically, I see where it benefits people. But like if you trying to just understand how our society works, like for whatever reason, there's a lot of people that's been told, like, if you see somebody with this type of skin and this type of hair, you know, they're up to no good, they're trying to rob you or something to attack your well-being. And then they might see, you know, on media or whatnot, they see this exact same thing. You know, not realizing, of course, there are racial, how should I say this?
Differences?
Like underlinings embedded in media for a long time. But, you know, what you see is what is, apparently. So there's that aspect, and these people potentially have the power to, like, change plenty of people's lives in our society. So when you have that stacked on against you, and plus the latency of racism nowadays, apparently, like, if you don't experience that, you're not gonna see it, and when you don't see it, you just gonna take it as people complaining or throwing out the race card, you know, playing the victim, which this is real shit. Like, people really getting affected by this shit. So, yeah, all in all, it's just two different worlds. And, like, I don't know, if you don't come from whatever world you come from, I mean, if you don't come from, like, the other world, it might be harder to explain, you know, where you come from, because, like, you know, empathy, like, when you've been there before, you can have a lot better understanding about what's going on than someone who hears about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel that there are two different Americas, two different realities that Americans live in. And, you know, just like here at UT, you know, there's white homecoming, there's Black homecoming, you know what I mean? So I think when looking into it, I hate that there's a divide, but I understand why there is to an extent. From the way that I see it as from the empathy side. Like, you know, And I don't want to just limit it to the Black world, you know, like the racial minority world. And in that case, a lot of times people, like, we feel like, you know, we don't get the, like white people aren't empathizing with us and like how we see the world and our culture, you know, like a lot of times these things get, you know, culturally appropriated and, you know, taken from us yet again. So I do feel like there's two different worlds, but the people who are quote unquote woke get to experience a little bit of both.
Yes, I do. Everyone, I'm not gonna say everyone, there's the America that is the land of the free, home of the brave. People come here for the American dream, and you see how immigrants are treated and immigration is treated, and talking about building a wall. So it just shows the stark difference, like the idealized version of what America is or should be, and then the people who actually experience it. I'm not gonna say the only, well, I will be petty. The only valid experience, I think, are the ones coming from the people who have experienced, I guess, the darker side of history. Because we talk about, oh, America is wonderful, let's make it great again. What was it great? When you're raping and pillaging and doing all these things, or even now when you fast forward to a time where UT already, when you think about it, it wasn't desegregated that long ago. Like the 60s, like my mom was born during the 60s. And also now you fast forward to the present where we do have a chancellor who's an open Trump supporter, or it's been speculated, let me do allegedly, a Trump supporter. And considering the campus climate of what has been here with diversity and inclusion, and having students throw cotton or bananas at the Black Culture Center during Obama's re-election, because that's when I first got here, it shows that clearly there are two different pictures being painted here, which is why now you all of a sudden seeing all these corner store Carolines and all of these things. There are two different Americas going on, because you feel threatened, or some people feel threatened and endangered by looking at us, when in reality, I'm not going to say you as a person, or some, like, your ancestry indicates about all of the horrendous crimes that have been committed against marginalized groups, regardless of skin color, because clearly you just don't, just like anybody that doesn't look like you. But all of the heinous crimes committed against those people, yet you turn a blind eye to it, and you fear the descendants of those people. And then when they tell you their stories, oh, no, not real, something's going on, or you can't listen to it. You have this cognitive dissonance because the only America you know has been the America that, I guess, the idealized or the lie that you've been told, and you accepted that as truth, whether ignorantly or knowingly. And now you have people experiencing this stuff and telling you this is our America, this is what we're experiencing. Childish Gambino, This is America video, I love it when that dropped, and you got media or hip hop is doing a great job in some areas of showing, like, this is what we're talking about. Like I mentioned, people want to talk about the Migos being the new Beatles or the new rock stars, and hip hop surpassing a lot of other genres in music, and you accept us in those arenas, and you accept us when we're playing for you, but you don't accept to play or kneeling. So it showed, okay, why, and you fail to ask, like, why are they kneeling in the first place? And it's tying into a whole bunch of stuff, but it goes to show you that clearly there are two different things happening here. That's the America that you think, that's the reality or the fantasy that you bought into, and the people are actually experiencing and telling you, no, this is what it is, this is what's happening.
There definitely is a white America and a Black America. There's issues that are not at the top of people's agenda that are for other people. There's different agendas on a bunch of people's minds. One thing I said recently, you can't fix the issues that you don't see. So I think there's definitely a disposition in our thought process is the main thing, rather than like inequality. Just we need to think the same and not think things get better.
So I do think there is white Americas and a Black Americas, especially on campus. For example, the Greeks, we have predominantly Caucasian Greeks on campus, and we have predominantly like Black
Greek organizations on campus as well. And it's funny because it's like in the predominantly Caucasian Greek organizations, there's maybe like one minority out of probably like 28 plus of them. Like, and it's like the same in regards to like the Black Greeks. It's really like not, you might see one or two like Caucasians. So I will say, yes, it is like two different worlds. Like we just all, both cases we operate two different ways. And it's just like certain events that maybe the African American community throws, white people are kind of like not interested in or don't find it like beneficial to attend. And when they do attend, it's like, oh, why am I here? I don't want to be here. And I feel like sometimes, occasionally, like the African Americans can be the same way in regards to like attending Caucasian people's events. So, I mean, I think that's why it's more separate on campus, because we just don't mix for some reason. Like, and I mean, I think it's a number of different like causes behind that. But yeah, I will say it is like two different worlds.
But I mean, in any aspect, there are definitely multiple views and perspectives of America. Like I'm gonna try to refrain from using color. So I would say the more privileged group definitely has one way of, seeing and experiencing America versus the more oppressed group. We have a totally different perspective that the privileged group has no idea of, whether that be experiences, sightings, feelings, thoughts, any like everything is separate when it comes to those two groups. I mean, to give an example, you could think about the UT setting, how the more privileged groups, they come here and their parents have already fully paid for their tuition, so they're not really stressed about the financial burdens of coming to an establishment of this caliber. Versus the more oppressed group, we have to worry about getting scholarships and grants and various other means to accommodate for the same financial burdens that this privileged person it never dawned on them because it was taken care of by the previous generation. That's one aspect, and you have to worry about different social groups, different, like I said earlier, different atmospheres for the different environments that are on campus. So I definitely believe that there are multiple aspects, different views to see America through, different lenses, so to speak, to see America through, and that happens every day.
I definitely believe there are two Americas. White America is an America where people don't question their day-to-day life. They go through life, just living life. They have fun. They meet someone, they fall in love, they have children. They never worry about their existence in this life. They never worry about what their children are going to grow up, the environment their children are going to grow up in, what kind of opportunities their children are going to have, if it's safe for their children to go outside and play. Black America is an America where you constantly have to be aware of yourself at all times. You have to be aware of where you are, who you're talking to, what you're doing, how you're acting, because that could be the last day you live. And a lot of people think that's an exaggeration, but it's not. It's absolutely not. Me as a Black woman, I have to be very careful about what I say and how I act, because I represent my entire community. I have to go through my day-to-day life thinking about, will I ever find somebody to marry? If I have children, are they going to be safe? How do I protect my family? How do I live a happy life knowing that I'll never have the freedoms that my white counterparts have? How do I live a life knowing that my Black counterparts in other countries are struggling? Being Black in America is, a lot of people like to say it's a privilege. To be in America, to be an American citizen is a privilege. It is not. Being Black anywhere is not a privilege. It's kind of a curse. And it's not a curse that we brought upon ourselves. It's a curse we have to live with, that we have to break. I love being Black. I wouldn't want to be anything else, quite frankly. But living in this world and being Black is a completely different experience than living in this world and being white. Regardless if you are a white American or your skin tone is fair-skinned, your experience, their experience from being Black is completely different.
Yes, for sure. Yes, especially when I think about culture. So culturally, I'm Black. Yes, I was born in America, but I don't have the same experience as a white American versus a Black American. I mean, they're two different worlds. I mean, I'm looking at, I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood. I went to predominantly Black schools. And when I came to UT, it was like being in another country. Honestly, it was a culture shock for me. There's just a lot of things that are different. And I mean, as far as like the schooling, the experiences, even churches, I mean, you know, I have friends who are Christian, and they're white, but their Christian experience is not the same as my Christian experience. And not to say that's a good or a bad thing, like we both practice the same religion, but we were raised differently as far as how our churches preach things to us or certain topics we focused on. So like if I go to a white church, I'm pretty sure one of the main topics is not going to be about injustice in the Bible. I mean, because that doesn't necessarily relate to white people and their history. But like in a Black church, we're for sure going to talk about injustice in the Bible, and we're going to talk about racism in the Bible, and like how Jesus defied those stereotypes and talk to the Samaritan woman, even though that was not the way culture went back in that time. So just little things like that. Black America and white America are completely different. Even though we're in the same place physically, different things go down. You know, like being in a Black neighborhood, I learned how to appreciate my culture, my heritage. And I may not necessarily have felt like an American, but I think like public school taught me how to be a, I guess, good citizen, how to be an American. We learned American history, even though it didn't necessarily apply.
I think that the America that we have is an America full of systemic racism. So we have a singular American experience founded on race and racism, but what is distinctive is that most white Americans tend to think that racism and race is a thing of the past and are not able to think about how the structural forms of systemic racism have kind of shaped all parts of their lives, and for white Americans systemically benefited them throughout this whole process, that these kind of resources and benefits that they've been able to get access to them seem naturalized and a given, if even meritocratic. Whereas for African Americans, Latinx folks, Native Americans, they've experienced America historically in a very different way. And so we have one America of empirical realities, but two different interpretations of America. Whites thinking that the American dream is there for anybody and everyone to achieve, and folks and racialized groups realizing that the America that's laid out for them has promoted all these barriers in many ways for them to ever achieve that.
Do you think that you code switch consciously or subconsciously or both?
I feel like it's a bit of both. When I am in conscious control of the identity that's being expressed, then I take into consideration the factors that I mentioned earlier, the environment, the particular person, how I may be feeling, maybe even the atmosphere of the environment, because the atmosphere and the environment are sometimes two distinct things. And so those are the factors that I consider when I'm consciously code switching. But other times it's pretty autonomic, where I've practiced it so much in this specific setting where it just happens, and there's no need to think about, oh, let me be more proper, let me speak more professional, let me, you know what I'm saying, christen up my collar for said individual or whatever the case may be. And then because each happens individually, I'm pretty sure that they also both happen simultaneously, where I have a bit of conscious influence as well as subconscious, maybe facial expressions that may be conveying a certain identity versus the tone that I'm pushing out at that same time.
Sometimes it's both. Like I said, when I'm in a professional environment, of course, like I'm not, hey, yo, what's up? Like, I'll be slightly formal. But the other time when I do feel like I'm more relaxed, I really don't have to. If I'm around people I know I can trust in that. Because even when I go to work, I don't feel like I have to code switch as much, even though I do work customer service. My boss and my work environment is very relaxed. However, when I interact with people who come up to me and approach me, then yes, I do have to switch it because I'm obviously trying to sell something or I have to reel you in as a customer. But besides that, sometimes yeah, sometimes no, but mostly it's done here, if anything. When I step outside and do other things throughout Knoxville, I don't have time. My customer service voice is about to run out and I'm not wasting it on just basic day-to-day interactions, so yeah.
I think it's a mixture of both. I think some of the things that I do just naturally happen, but I do know when I'm changing how I'm talking in the classroom versus when I'm talking to a group of my friends. But sometimes me straightening my hair or wearing weave or the way I dress, those are subconscious code switching. Like, who says that I have to dress in a button down and a pair of slacks to enter some, educational environment? Like, who says that's the right way to do that? But if I don't, but yeah, so I think some things are subconscious. Like, I get up in the morning and I put on business casual clothes because I feel like I want to, but that can also be me subconsciously feeling like I have to convert to white standards.
It's a little bit of both. At first, when I'm in a new environment, with a group of people I don't really know, yeah, I might, talk a little bit more proper, or whatnot. But at the same time, once that happens, subconsciously, it becomes a conscious thing, why are you doing this? Do we even have to do this? So it might switch from, what people might call the white voice, the proper type of tone, to, I don't know how I talk regularly, I guess. I don't really know how, I just talk regularly, but I feel like I'm talking regularly now, so I guess that's something to go off of, I guess. But I don't know.
I feel like it depends on who I'm talking to. I feel like if it's someone that I don't know and I'm still trying to fill them out, then I'm more likely to consciously code switch. But if it's someone that I know and I'm really good friends with, then it's more easy for me to subconsciously code switch and just, chill with them.
I'll say when I first got to college, it was consciously a lot. But after a while, it gets so natural that it just comes out when you're around certain groups of people. Certain parts of my personality just naturally come out around Black people, and certain parts of my personality are tucked away when I'm not around a lot of Black people. That's just how it is. And that's a very, I guess, blunt statement to say, but that's the reality of it. And I'm sure other people can attest to the same thing. So yeah, I feel like it's a bit of both. I subconsciously and consciously code switch a lot.
It's probably a mixture of both. And I think it's also different individuals have different also cultural experiences and backgrounds. And you really have to situate it in the context where people are navigating in their own personal histories and their own personal identities. And I think because also, however, racism is so dominant and pervasive in the United States, particular African Americans, but other racialized groups too, have since day one have always had to navigate and negotiate some form of what it means to interact in those spaces, even if they, you know, grew up in predominantly black neighborhoods, went predominantly black schools, etc. Just by the mere fact of being in the United States. You know, they're constantly inundated with messages about themselves and what that means. And so I think you could be both conscious and unconscious of the things that you do based upon, you know, just being socialized in the United States around these issues around race.
Yeah, so I believe that white Americans need to learn and understand the concept that just because someone is different from you does not make them inferior to you. You know, like a person doesn't have to change for them in order for them to be accepted. I feel like across the board, if that became the standard, then we'll be in a better America.
Just listen to the people like you listen to our music, and you absorb the rest of the culture. And like I said, you can recite Gold Digger word for word by Kanye, because they still play it up here every function. And you can understand it when it's presented to you in that aspect. Why can't you understand it when someone's just talking to you and someone's that's right by you? Like if you can recite Walk It Like I Talk It, if you can absorb other components of Black culture, why can't you absorb something as simple as an accent or like the euphemisms that we use? Because, and also understand that just because it sounds different or it may have a certain twang or whatever to it, that doesn't make it ignorant or any less intelligent than how you speak. I think there's a whole lot of respectability politics that come along with language and speech, but people fail to realize the history that comes with the speech. Because even the Southern accents versus the Northern accent, that just shows you, when you listen to like the speech patterns, it goes into how the slaves were brought over, or the enslaved Africans were brought over, and how they were distributed and who their colonizers were based off of how their accents are, so that those accents have history. And the fact you want to minimize that history, but you just write it off as ignorance, it shows just how misguided you are. So just take the time to listen to it and absorb it like you absorb everything else, or appropriate everything else based on who you are. So yeah.
Well, let's be real. White supremacy, don't give a fuck if I live or die here, they want to see me dead. So, who else I got? I got my people. And all in all, we just gotta come together, and we just gotta build shit on our own, because nobody wanna build for us, or, you know, try to pave the way for us. So, if we own shit, we make the rules for it. So with that, we can basically possibly create a system where we judge people based off of, you know, what they say and their justifications for it, besides, regardless of how they say it. And we're not just, you know, looking at how, you know, proper they sound, or how what we call intelligent, you know, is how intelligent they say it. So all in all, I don't see it.
There have to be some form of universal lens where everyone could get a general sense of the same experiences, the same thoughts be provoked, the same feelings be evoked from every person across circumstances. That would have to be the first step. Just having a centralized front where all people could look from and understand it, and it not seem so foreign. I think judgments have to be taken out of when you see people, no matter if they're considered the majority or the minority, based on anything: education, financial standing, cultural background, whatever it may be. Ethics and race shouldn't be a factor at all when it comes to the first judgments from a first impressional meetings. And I think it's just a lot of superficial, like surface level judgments that happen prior to two people even exchanging words.
So I think that the one thing our campus could do is more integration with the organizations. Greek life, for one. I feel like there are a lot of the Pan-Hellenic and like MGC, MPHC, like that needs to be more blended. We should do more together. so that we can know about each other and how we act. And I can even speak for myself. When I began to let go of my, I guess, preconceived notions of how white people act and how they talk, like when I let all that go and actually stepped outside of my comfort zone and talked to white people, befriended white people, and even traveling out of the country, meeting people who are multi-ethnic, it shows you that at the end of the day, we're all human. We do have different experiences, different backgrounds, different races, but that's where the beauty of it comes. You learn how to be yourself around people who can be themselves, and you realize how beautiful it is. I mean, God created us to be different ethnicities for a reason. I mean, it's a beautiful thing once you get past your own uncomfort or your lack of education, your lack of knowledge of your brother and your sister.
I don't think there is a definite solution. Only time would really tell. But I don't think we would develop that or even like come up with anything close to a solution until further on down the line. It won't be anytime soon, definitely. But I think it's always a possibility. However, it's just a matter of the people at that time. Like, that would be a dramatic change, and that would have to cause a lot of other, like, groups of individuals change their mindset, how they act and behave. And that's gonna have to progress over time. It's just not gonna be definite, like, immediately. So I will say that I believe there is a solution, or we could possibly come up with a solution. But as of right now, I don't even think we're close to that just yet, or making that type of progress.
Well, I mean, I think part of the challenge is that even how we frame it, the onus is put on people of color to have to change their behaviors. And I think that in itself is problematic. And, you know, it's really incumbent upon white institutions and white folks to raise their own racial literacy of what and how race and racism impacts our society, and that helps them change their own consciousness around these issues so that code switching, you know, would not be something that people of color felt that they needed to do as a strategy and to kind of negotiate these spaces. So, you know, I want to put the emphasis back on white institutions and white folks to do that work ourselves. But I think, and having, you know, important, you know, conversations about how, you know, our institutional structural spaces have created this context where students feel that, you know, for their kind of survival and own health, they have to do that. But also that takes on a really powerful kind of emotional labor that they have to do to negotiate all these different spaces, students of color, which white students don't have to do. And, you know, faculty, our administration, we all need to be aware of that. And it's not just providing resources and other things, but it's about how we can ultimately transform these types of spaces to be truly inclusive and transformative and not just diversity with numbers, right? But changing even the nature of our institutional structures.
So tell me what you have there.
Yeah, so it was actually in my intro to sociology class. I drew this little depiction. It kind of displays what it feels like to be a Black student, at least from my perspective here on campus. Sometimes like you're fighting these thoughts and these microaggressions that are either verbally expressed to you or you kind of just feel. So like some of the things that, you know, I've gotten is like, oh, you don't sound Black or act Black. Like, oh, you know, you don't dress ghetto. You know, just certain things that are kind of just attached to being at UT's campus. So yeah, I don't know. I was just writing this out today. I was kind of overwhelmed by a lot of emotions. And so I just decided to draw something, a really quick sketch to sketch out my emotions.
I see that you're wearing a pin. Can you tell me the significance behind it?
I actually have a lot of pins that I wear throughout the week. I like to remind my peers of the significance of these things. But this particular pin is the 1968 Olympics featuring Tommy Smith and John, I believe, Carlos, raising the Black Power fist once they won the 200-meter run. I think, this pin is one of my favorites because this happened in 1968. People love to say that slavery was so long ago, but it's kind of like, what about disenfranchisement? What about Jim Crow? What about, this era, the civil rights movement? Like, this era didn't come from nowhere. Like, these people were fighting for their rights 50 years ago. I mean, the struggles that they experienced to raise their Black Power fist at an event like this are the things that we're still experiencing today. And I think it's very important to remind my peers that we're not doing this because we want to. We're doing it because we have to.
And so you're a photographer based in Knoxville. So my next question is, when you're conducting business or on a set for a shoot with, let's say, your Caucasian clients and your Black clients, do you find yourself playing different music or having a different type of conversation while doing a photo shoot? Like, do you think there is a difference in?
There's definitely a difference. African American clients of mine tend to be a lot more colloquial, and Caucasian clients will just be like, let's get to the point. I always make small talk, ask them how their day is going, stuff like that. But there are situations and things that only the Black American has to deal with that other nationalities and ethnicities don't. Sometimes talk about that. There's definitely a difference in music. I found I would play a lot of Beyonce when I'm shooting Black females, and it's really a vast different amount of music when